Erev Tov, everyone. Parsha of Nitzavim relates to us the covenant, the bris that the Ribbono Shel Olam entered with Klal Yisrael before their entry into Eretz Yisrael. And the Mefarshim point out that there are three britot that the Torah told us about. There was the brit at Har Sinai. And there, that brit was shattered by the Ma'aseh Egel. And therefore, to a certain extent, it never went into being. That brit, the Mefarshim explain, was on individuals. In other words, every person would be judged as to whether or not he or she fulfilled the covenant based on their personal behavior, on what they did. They performed the mitzvot, so then the brit applied to them. If they did not perform the mitzvah, so then they were not included, but it was personal, it was not national. So that bris was shattered when Moshe down from Sinai and broke the luchot. So there's a second brit. That brit is in Bechukotai and in Kitavo, which is the brit of the Tochecha that we read last Shabbat. And that brit is not personal anymore. In fact, that brit has nothing to do with how a person behaves. It's a national brit. So a person can be a tzaddik, but if somehow the national covenant is not fulfilled, so then the punishments come, and they come upon the righteous just as much as they come upon the wicked. The Gemara says, "Given sheniten rishus lamashchis lahashchis." Once, so to speak, the sword is loose. Eino mavchin bein tzaddik l'rasha. So then it doesn't make any difference. Like God forbid, an epidemic, a pandemic, whatever, once strikes everyone. So that's a different kind of a covenant. That covenant, the Mefarshim teach us, is one that was unbreakable. The national covenant of Israel, that is unbreakable and unchangeable. And therefore, all of the events that are described in the covenant take place. Before we discuss, there's a philosophical problem here, is that person righteous, why should that person suffer and undergo the terrible hardships of this national covenant? And there are many, not answers to the question, but approaches to the question. as to why that should be. But there are examples, there are not every German in the Second World War was a Nazi or was a Russia, and their cities got bombed out and made no difference because they're part of the nation. And therefore, that covenant is still in place. But here in Parshas Nitzavim is a different covenant completely. This is a covenant of mutual responsibility and accountability. It's a covenant that Jews are bound one to another. They call Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bozeh covenant. So I'm a partner in all of your mitzvot, but I'm also open for the liability of things that are done wrong. It's on my account also. Maybe we can understand it in terms of today is there's a large corporation that sells shares in its company. So I own a certain percentage of the shares. I don't necessarily control the company, but I have shares in the company. If the company is successful, the management is correct, not corrupt, does well, so then my shares increase even though I did nothing. I bought the share when it was 5 and now it's 100. What did I do? And the same thing is true in reverse. I bought the shares at 100 and it was mismanaged and stolen from. Now the share is only 5. So again, not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. But I'm part of the company. And therefore, as the company progresses, whatever happens to the company happens to me too. And that was the covenant of mutual responsibility. And the Torah tells us, that the person thinks that he's not involved. Ani b'shirus libi eleich, I can do what I want. Aman shoshavos atzmeya, let other people worry about it. It doesn't work that way. And again, that's a covenant that not over, but that's an eternal covenant. It's asher yeshno po imanu omed hayom, it's asher inenu po omed hayom imanu. It binds over the generations, and therefore the Meforshim discuss. We say slichas now. So in the slichas every morning, we say bogadnu, gazalnu, always b'lashon rabim. We have sinned, we have stolen, we have spoken, I'll say, what do you want from me? I never did that. I don't steal. I'm not an evil person. So the language should be Oshamti, Ogaditi, and then you can pick and choose. Or the same thing on Yom Kippur, we're going to say the Alchetz, we'll confess 10 times. I never did that. I may have done other things, but that, not me. So that's why we say B'lashon Rabbi. B'lashon Rabbi is somebody did it. And that somebody is a Jew and I'm signed on his paper. So therefore it's Chotonu. We also have sinned. Meforshim say from there that the Torah gave us the right of Ocheach Tochiach and Samisecha, that we can try to improve others. We can try to tell others a better way to live. Because again, on the surface, it's none of my business what you do. What do I care? But the answer is that you're affecting the values of my shares. You, by your behavior, draw me into the problem as well. And therefore, I have the ability to tell you about it. The Maggid has a famous mashal that man went to borrow money. So like here in Israel, for instance, on a mortgage, on everything, you have an orev. You have to have a guarantor. Somebody guarantees. Usually, the guarantor does so because he never expects that he'll have to pay. But legally, he's bound. And if the debtor defaults, so then depending whether he's what kind of an orev he is, but eventually the orev has to pay. So if the orev sees the borrower going to the racetrack or going to the gambling hall or goes into the bar and squanders the money, so the orev naturally gets hold of him and he says, "Well, are you crazy? How could you do that? You owe the money to people. We'll have to pay it back. I won't let you do that." So that's the idea of Hocheach Tochiach Esamisecha. I'm signed on your note, and you go out and you desecrate everything, and then you think that no one has a right to tell you? No one has a right to complain? You're destroying it for everybody. The old parable about the guy on the boat, that he digs a hole. He said, "But I dig it only under my seat. Under my seat, I can dig it." He doesn't realize the whole boat will drop. So that's part of the covenant. That's part of the idea here. And Moshe says, "Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem." All of us stand there. All of us are included in it. We are bound by the covenant. The covenant has great benefits. The shares go up, but the covenant has also liabilities, so it has downside. So the Gemara therefore says that the person that has the ability to give tochacha to others should do so. It takes talent to give tochacha. And you have to know when and how and who. But the tochacha begins at home. With oneself, one's family, one's community, one's neighbors, one's society. And the greatest tochacha is always example. Menachem Begin writes in one of his autobiographical notes that when he was yet with the Irgun, with Eitzel, so Rav Aryeh Levin, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, was like the Rov went to jail for them, etc. He was a holy man. They were all in awe of him. And Begin writes then that still he used to smoke on Shabbos. So he said he was walking down the street one Shabbos and he had a cigarette in his hand and he saw Reb Aryeh was coming. And you know what to do. So he put the cigarette inside, like he tucked it in his shirt, so you shouldn't see it. And Reb Aryeh came and he held his hand. And he held his hand. And then he said, the cigarette burned me. He said, the British never tortured me like Reb Aryeh did. He says, from that day on, he said, I don't smoke on Shabbos. Oh, wow. So that's the presence of a person is enough for the tochacha. Therefore, Chazal always say, you should always see great people. That itself is a tochacha. How can I do it? They don't look. So that is all part of this idea of the brit of the tochacha that is the centerpiece of this week's parsha of Nitzavim. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashio merotzak Baruch Hu l'zakas Yisrael. V'hir lahem Torah mitzvos shene'amar Adonai chafetz aman tzidko yagil Torah v'yadir.